Hello everybody, my name is Alexei and this is the tutorials on how to use Playwright for test automation. A little bit about me, I've been in QA for a little bit over 10 years and I've been doing the automation for over 7 years. I started with Selenium and I've been using it for about 5 years. After that I switched to Cypress, which I've been using for about 1 year. After Cypress I came across Playwright and I've been using this tool ever since and I absolutely love it. In this tutorial I want to share my knowledge with you. Okay, let's get started. Why should you learn and use Playwright? As of 2023, Playwright is gaining popularity and as I see it, more and more companies and teams are started using it. The tool is backed by Microsoft and is developed and supported by a team inside of the Microsoft, which is nice to have something that backed by a big name company, which means most likely this tool will be supported for a long period of time. Playwright supports multiple languages such as JavaScript, TypeScript, Java, C Sharp, and Python. It's fast. It's faster than any other UI automation tool on the market. It has a good support for a variety of locators, which we are going to learn later in this course. It also supports reporting out of the box for JavaScript binding. As I mentioned earlier, you can use 5 different languages to work with in a Playwright, but the default 2 languages that I personally recommend to work with when using Playwright is JavaScript and TypeScript. The difference is that you will find the entire framework out of the box with those 2 languages, like the test runner, reporting, logging, along with flexibility to plug your own tools. On the other hand, if you use it with Java, C Sharp, or Python, you will need to integrate your own tools into the framework. Playwright also supports a visual comparison out of the box. What it means is that on the first execution of your script, Playwright will take a screenshot of the page and store it, and the next time you'll be executing a test, it will take a new screenshot of the same page and compare it with the original one. If a new screenshot does not match the existing one, the test will fail. Playwright also supports the ADA testing out of the box. ADA testing is American Disability Act, which is a set of guidelines on how the website should look and behave for people with different types of impairments, like visual impairments and hearing impairments. Underneath it uses tool called X, which scans the HTML of the page against the guidelines and will give errors if the guidelines are violated. It also supports the parallel execution. Most of the tools have a support for executing multiple files in parallel. For example, if you have 10 tests in a single file, they will be executing one after another since they all reside in a single file. However, in Playwright can execute multiple tests in a single file in parallel. In this example, if you set the test to be executed 5 tests in parallel, Playwright will execute 5 tests at the same time for a single file. Playwright supports a sync-await syntax compared to promises like Cypress does. In my opinion, a sync-await gives a cleaner syntax and it's way easier to read compared to promises. Also in Playwright, you can write any JavaScript code without having to use escape hatches like you have to in Cypress. Also, Playwright has extremely powerful configuration with a lot of flexibility. For example, you can set configurations for your entire test execution, then override the same configuration for a particular browser or a suite of tests. And then on top of that, you can override same configuration for a single test. You can set different types of timeouts, different permutation of tests and browser based on your needs and the way you need it, and more. Also, Playwright has a support for executing your script in the different types of continuous integration tools like Azure, Jenkins, GitHub, CircleCI, and others, as well as a Docker container. Playwright has a support for the component testing, which is kind of experimental as of 2022, but I'm pretty sure it will become stable at some point. Okay, let's move forward. Comparison Playwright and Selenium. When it comes to comparison of Playwright and Selenium, Playwright is faster than Selenium. Playwright also supports multiple reporters out of the box like HTML, JSON, XML, or dot reporter, and more. Also, Playwright has better support for locators, like you can do the multiple XPath and multiple CSS locators, and in Selenium you can't. Also, Playwright has the auto waits out of the box, which means when certain actions are being taken on an element like clicking or entering a text into the text field, Playwright will wait for element to be in DOM, also be visible and interactable before performing any action. Also, Playwright supports out of the box for API testing and capturing network traffic. What it means is that with Playwright, you can capture and modify any request and response that goes out to the backend server from your front end, or vice versa, that coming back from the backend to your front end. And you also can modify that request and response, and it's really helpful in scenarios. For example, if you want a user to check if user send the wrong incorrect email and password, how your UI will handle it. You pretty much just intercept the response with replacing the status code and body of the response, and you check how your UI handles it. As I mentioned earlier, Playwright also supports visual comparison and ADA testing out of the box, while Selenium doesn't. All right, now let's take a look at the speed comparison. So as you can see, this comparison was done against three main benchmarks: the static website, the checklist single, and checklist suite. And the comparison was done against five tools: Playwright, Puppeteer, WebDriver IO, Selenium, Just WebDriver IO, and Cypress. As you can see, in all of the categories, Playwright was the fastest one, except of the static website, where Puppeteer was the fastest and Playwright was the second fastest. However, it was faster than Selenium and Cypress, as you can see here. All right, the next one is comparing Playwright and Cypress. Playwright has a support for cross-domain, while Cypress doesn't. What it means is you can navigate to any page you want, any domain you want, without any issues. For example, if you want to go to google.com, enter search result, and then navigate to yahoo.com, you can in Cypress. In Playwright, you can. Playwright also has a support for multiple tabs and multiple browsers, while Cypress doesn't. What it means, you can open multiple tabs in one test or multiple browsers in one test. In Cypress, you have to use one browser and one tab per single test. Also, Cypress doesn't support Safari while Playwright does, so you cannot test your web application against Safari. In Cypress, in Playwright, you can. In addition to that, Playwright has a good support for the iframes. In Cypress, you cannot work with iframes. Also, as I just mentioned, Playwright is faster than Cypress. Playwright also has a support for soft assertion, while Cypress doesn't. We're going to learn what soft assertion are later in this course, but in a nutshell, it's a type of assertion where your test doesn't fail right away, where you can perform multiple assertions, and after all the assertions are done, if your test pass, it will be marked as pass. If something fail, it will mark as fail. It is very helpful in scenario, for example, if you log in and you want to assert that the user is navigated to a certain URL and certain page title is displayed. What you can do, you can use the soft assertion to assert the URL and then assert title. Without the soft assertions, if the URL doesn't match, the title assertion will never get executed. With soft assertion, it will check for both of them, and if one of them fails, in any of them fails, only then the error will be thrown and your test will fail. Also, as I mentioned, Playwright has a support for async await syntax, which I personally think is better. It's easier to read compared to promise like syntax like Cypress does. In addition to that, Playwright supports the vanilla JavaScript, while Cypress has its own APIs. So if you want, for example, to store some variable for later use in your task, in Playwright you can just use the plain JavaScript code using the var or const keyword. In the Cypress, you need to use their own APIs, aliases, and other APIs. Also, Cypress requires you to have escape hatches through the index file. If you want to execute arbitrary JavaScript code in Playwright, you can write your JavaScript anywhere you want and you'll be fine. No need for escape sketches. Alright, next one, let's take a look at the disadvantages of Playwright. The only single disadvantage I see is a smaller community, and it's pretty reasonable since Playwright is a newer tool compared to Selenium and Cypress. It has a smaller community and smaller support. However, Playwright has a Slack channel where a lot of people who use Playwright reside in answering questions. So if you come across any issues that you cannot find by simple Google search, just come to the Slack channel and people usually answer a question in a timely manner. Other than that, I don't see any issues with or disadvantages with the Playwright. And as I mentioned, it's a great tool. And in the next video, we're going to take a look at the installation process and we're going to run our first test. I'll see you then.